It is often said in this day and age that chivalry is dead. What historical events have led to the decline of chivalry, and how would you suggest fighting this modernist trend?
Well, you have to define chivalry because it has several definitions. If you look at it as knighthood, per se, then gunpowder, that took care of the mounted knights on horseback.
Wow.
But if you talk about it as a code of behavior in everyday life, and if you wanted to point to a single thing, in this country anyway, the legalization of birth control, or the allowing the states via the courts to taking away from the states the right to outlaw birth control back in '64. Why do I say that? Well, you've got to remember that once we take away the Catholic faith, which is really what justified chivalry in reality, it was the application of the faith to various aspects of society. Warfare, hunting, dealing with women, all that. That came directly from the Catholic faith, and that was what the Code of Chivalry came out of. But once the faith was taken away, chivalry still retained an important, what's the word I want? Pragmatic reason for being. And I'm going to be very reductionist right now. Keeping girls from getting pregnant.
Wow.
That was a big part of it.
Yeah.
Why? Well, number one, if a girl got pregnant out of wedlock in those days, there was a huge amount of social disapproval. And that social disapproval was partly intended to keep the girl from getting pregnant out of wedlock. Why is this such a bad thing? Because it destroys the family. Why does it destroy the family? Because a girl is raising a kid without a father, etc. I mean, it's why you had chaperones at dances. It's why in colleges they had what was called locum tenens, the doctor locum tenens, which means that the college or the university took the place of the parent. Which is why residence halls had house mothers and house fathers who kept the kids, made sure they were in at night, kept people from the opposite sex from crawling in the window. I mean, they did their best, obviously, at all times there's been a problem. And then, of course, behaving toward women, treating them well, treating them as worthwhile in and of themselves as opposed to mere sexual objects. That also went a long way toward helping to keep down illicit pregnancy.
Mm.
Why? Because if you think of a woman as something to cherish, to respect, even if you don't even know her,
Yeah.
you're less likely to take advantage of her. Now, mind you, people didn't sit around thinking about this. They just did it. So that's why when a woman came into a room, everyone stood up at the table. And again, when she left. Because women were considered something really, really worthwhile. And obviously there were tons of people who violated this code. There isn't a law or a code in existence that has not been honored almost as much as the breach as the observance. But it was nevertheless the case. So what happens? The pill comes along and becomes available everywhere. Almost overnight, all of this vanished. And with it, of course, came feminism. And part of the thing about feminism that's important to bear in mind is that as our numbers began to decrease, you still needed bodies, as in Europe. So getting women into the workplace to work like dogs the way men do was very important to our lords and masters. Just as getting them into the military, now that the situation is worse, getting them to fight and die like men is so important today. But how can it be restored? Well, it's like this. Chivalry did not develop for its own sake or out of its own sake. It developed from the interaction of the faith between people among people in a certain area of life, specifically soldiering. That's what it came from. Soldiering and ruling and stuff like that. Chivalry will arise again apart from on the individual level, because there'll always be people who are enchanted by the idea of chivalry and will try to live it in their everyday lives, which is a great thing. I don't want to put that down. But it will not, again, affect society until the faith affects society. Because it was a byproduct. I mean, to put this another way, you know what a tea cozy is?
No.
A tea cozy is a beautiful cloth thing that you put over a teapot to keep it warm.
Okay.
And they're beautifully embroidered, some of them are absolutely gorgeous. Well, let's say people stop drinking tea out of pots. What would happen to tea cozies?
They're gone.
Yeah. Now, if you ask me, well, gee, how can we bring back the tea cozy? And there were all these beautiful tea cozies, they don't make them anymore. How do we bring back the tea cozy? Well, the answer is to start drinking tea out of teapots again. If you don't do that, you're not going to have tea cozies.
Yeah.
When there's a beautiful byproduct of something, you have to have this. You have to restore the something before you can get the byproduct.
Okay. Let's jump back a little bit on this, because in Leon Gautier's book on chivalry, published by Tumblr House.
Oh, is that a plug? Oh.
If I remember correctly, he cited two things. One is, I think he sort of cited when chivalry started to disconnect from the faith via King Arthur and such, that sort of began the descent. And then the other thing, which happened much later, I think 19th century, is the sort of the nail on the coffin was Don Quixote, which totally made fun of it. Or what did that just represent?
Well, I agree with him and I don't at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
in the sense that I know what he means.
Yeah.
But with in the case of King Arthur, so you've got to remember that medieval romances, of which, we get a lot of our views of chivalry,
Yeah.
Came in three basic genres, or four. The Matter of Britain, which was the story of King Arthur and his knights. The Matter of the Matter of France, which was the story of Charlemagne and his knights. And that was primarily what Gautier was working from. As a good Frenchman, he didn't really care for the Matter of Britain.
Yeah.
The Matter of Rome, which was the sort of medievalization of stories like the Siege of Troy and Alexander the Great, and Julius Caesar. And then the Matter of Jerusalem, which was stories about the Crusades.
Mm-hmm.
Those four. Now, what Gautier, I think, rightly saw, I may not agree with his reasons for it, but I think he saw quite rightly, was number one, the idea of chivalry becoming an end in itself, which it certainly happened.
Yeah.
And then you have the rise of the idea of courtly love and all sorts of other things. And one of the things that he was very upset with, I'm sure, was the adulterous romance between Guinevere and Lancelot.
Yeah.
Which certainly is not the most uplifting element
Yeah.
of the Arthurian story. So that's one problem. The second, as far as Don Quixote goes, it is true that Don Quixote certainly made fun of chivalry. In particular, he made fun of the chivalric romances that were very common at the time. But you have to remember a few things about Cervantes, who wrote Don Quixote. Firstly, he had been there. He fought at Lepanto.
Oh, wow.
He lost an arm. He really was a knight in his own life.
Wow.
So he was in a position to make fun, number one. Number two, and you'll rarely see an author who hasn't actually been in combat, done the thing, who doesn't make some fun of the heroics of authors who have never done it. So you've got to bear this in mind.
Okay.
And the second is that our friend Cervantes does kind of a double whammy with Don Quixote, because on the one hand, he's silly, he mistakes everything, he's under delusions, and so on and so forth, and yet at the end, it all ends up coming true. At the end, he's actually right, and everyone else is wrong.
Yeah.
Not in the way he consciously thought it, but his impulses were better than anyone else's. So everyone thinks of Don Quixote purely as a satire on chivalry, but it's as much an attack on the lack of chivalry. Don Quixote is the most virtuous man in the book.
Yeah.
He's the most admirable man. He's whacked. It's a little bit like Confederacy of Dunces. He's whacked and all that, but he's also the moral center. You know, and even when, for instance, he talks to the tavern prostitutes and he addresses them as good virgins, and they laugh hysterically because, as Cervantes puts it, that address was so far into their actual employ. And yet he saw in them what they could be. If you are so completely virtuous yourself that you're incapable of seeing the sins of others, that's actually a very high level of virtue. That would be very practical.
Yeah.
But it's more admirable than the cunning that most of us exercise. So you see, these things are a little more complex, I think, than Gautier led them. But being a good Frenchman, he knew that both British and Spaniards were evil. And I understand that, as a Frenchman myself. I get it. As a Frenchman who speaks English and lives in a Spanish-founded city, now I get it all.